Hello, everyone. Welcome to the EUG podcast. I'm here with a special guest today, my good friend Bo Sandoval. Bo, thank you for joining me today.
Hector, man, it's good to see you. Happy to be here. It's been a good day. Hope yours is going just as well.
Oh man, it's going great, great, great. Um, Obviously, you're in Texas now, right? You
Yes,
moved
sir.
and you left me here
Yes,
by
sir.
myself, right?
Oh, it's so sad.
Oh, come on now,
So,
come on now. So tell me a little bit about the move, and let's just go back and let's just start on your upbringing and where you grew up.
sure. Yeah, I'm growing up. I bounced around a little bit. I was born in Lubbock, Texas. Was only there for about 2 months, and my parents we lived in Houston for a short time when I was little, and grew up in a split household. So my parents got divorced when I was young, 4 years old, and but I had an amazing stepfather in my life as well. So I kind of got the benefits of growing up with two dads. Um, we lived in Houston for my toddler years, and then what I call home is Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That's where I grew up and really ran around with my knucklehead friends and kind of earned my stripes as a teenage boy and playing high school sports and all that kind of stuff. So in when I was growing up in high school, it's kind of understood. My mom kind of implanted it early that you were going to find something to do, and if you had a chance to pursue college, you were going to do that. And so I there was a program back then in the state of Louisiana called TOPS, where if you had a certain GPA and a certain score on your SAT, you could or your ACT, you could get an in-state scholarship, and all your tuition was waived, and I
Oh,
qualified for that. And yeah, so I ended up starting school at Northwestern State, Louisiana, which is up in Natchitoches, Louisiana. It's the top of the state, and it's where they filmed the movie Steel Magnolias. So that's their claim to fame. But um, when I got there, I applied to an on-campus job. I didn't. I'm like every college kid. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to do something sport related, but I didn't really have an idea. And when I applied for an on-campus job, they stuck me out at the softball and baseball fields cutting grass. And so I was like, I can do that, and I'll make some
right.
extra money, extra cash. And after doing that for a couple of weeks, the softball coach approached me and asked me if I'd be interested in being an equipment manager. And I didn't really know what that was at the time. And she's like, well, you're going to help take care of the field, the stadium, but you'll also help with like equipment, laundry. You'll kind of be, a manager for the team and help us with stuff when we travel for road trips and that kind of thing. I'm like, oh, okay. She said, well, I'll pay for your school. And I said, well, my school's already paid for. And she said, well, I can cut you a monthly check and essentially like a small salary.
Hmm.
So I said, sure, let's do that. And about 2 or 3 weeks into that, I started seeing the team going down into the weight room, and they were training 3, 4 times a week, doing their strength and conditioning work. And so I asked her, I'm like, do you care if I go down and observe what they're doing and take a look? And she's like, yeah, no problem. I'll call the strength coach and we'll let you be a fly on the wall. So I met him. His name was Thad Livingston, really welcoming guy at the time. And he let me come in and just watch. And pretty quickly, after observing, how he interacted with them in training and preparing for the game, but then also on road trips and what he was advising them to do in their off seasons and in between games, it's kind of like this physical prep caretaker that I was observing. And I was like, man, I think that'd be a lot of fun. I think I could do that. And
Nice.
so I continued my first year kind of, being a manager for them. And that head coach ended up getting hired as the head softball coach at Southern Mississippi, which was a little bit bigger school, closer to my hometown. It was only about 2 hours away from Baton Rouge, and Natchitoches at the time is like 3.5 hours. So I'm like, oh, I'm a little closer to home. They'll pay for my school there as well, even though it was out of state tuition. She got all of that waived. And I said, I'll do it on one condition, that you get my foot in the door with their strength and conditioning department right up front. And she said, yeah, no problem. I got you. And
Love
literally
it.
the day I set foot on campus, I had a meeting with their entire strength staff, which at the time was like 2 or 3 people. And they kind of told me, like, yeah, you can be a volunteer intern to start out. You can get a little class credit for it, but you're basically going to be helping us clean the weight room, and you're going to be filling up water jugs. And that's what I did for the first semester. That quickly turned into, hey, now you've seen some things. We're going to get you to start helping out with a couple of small tasks. And that started leading me into coaching and understanding what coaching was and trying to figure out what kind of coach I was and what I wanted to be. That's where I started. I interned there for the rest of my undergrad, so almost 4 years. That's actually when I discovered jiu-jitsu the first time as well.
Nice. And who was your first instructor there?
My first instructor was a gentleman named Chad Pittman, who he was just starting a Pedro Sauer Academy in that area. He's in law enforcement. He had seen what jiu-jitsu could do for him in terms of being a more prepared police officer. He's also an Army veteran, so he would go down on the weekends. There's a military base not too far away from Hattiesburg, and he was teaching a lot of the MPs and enlisted men jiu-jitsu as well. And he was, I believe he had just gotten his purple belt at that time when Pedro Sauer kind of gave him his blessing to do a little bit of instruction down there, and that he would bring Pedro in 3-4 times a year, and we'd have camps and clinics. And he ended up bringing like Hoist Gracie down and a few others that are closely tied to Pedro. And for me, it was just I wasn't like an athlete. When I was in high school, I did track and field and played football and did all that stuff. And I wasn't really competing as an athlete when I was going to school. I was training and I was learning how to train athletes. So jiu-jitsu kind of gave me that little something to compete in. Again, we did some little local tournaments down around the New Orleans area and in other areas of Jackson, Mississippi, stuff like that. But anyhow, when I got done with my undergrad, graduate school was an option. I kind of knew if you wanted to be successful in this field, I needed to have a master's degree to do it at the level that I wanted to do it at. And by good graces and doing a good enough job of representing myself and throughout my internships, the staff there, they offered me a graduate assistantship. It was essentially like continue coaching, a little more coaching responsibility, plus we're going to pay for your graduate school. So I through work and dedication and the eagerness to learn, I essentially didn't have to take out any student loans. I didn't have to go through all that, which I've observed and seen and watched. Man, I've seen my nephews and nieces go through it, and
Crazy.
It's unbelievable the amount of debt you can acquire. So I've never taken that for granted and really tried to maximize, taking advantage of that. And when I got done with school there, I got hired at a small NAIA Presbyterian college in Jackson, Mississippi, working with 14 sports all by myself. I was the youngest coach on staff. The majority of the coaches there were in their 40s, 50s. We had a Hall of Fame baseball coach who was in his mid 60s. And so I just looked at it as it's an incredible opportunity to learn because everybody here is more experienced than I am.
And do you feel like, in all through all this time, like when you were doing internships, like going in there and filling up water jugs, it's like you didn't get paid for some of this stuff, and it's like, man, I just want to learn it. I feel like a lot of people don't realize that it's a grind, and sometimes you got to just go out there and do something if you really love it to put in the time without getting paid. Because I mean, some people expect pay right away. Oh, well, how much are you going to pay me? Well, wait a second, you don't even know how to do anything yet. I mean, that's just the way I think. You know what I mean?
100%. It's a tough pill to swallow sometimes, that maturation time on when you're going to actually be worth something, but you have to get to that point. For me, what put me at peace with being able to go in there and spend, I was in there at 4:30 in the morning and sometimes 7 p.m. at night, and I was going in and out of class in between training sessions. But the way that I paid my bills, I worked 3 jobs. I drove a beer truck, and those 2 or 3 mornings in the morning, we started at usually at 4 a.m. and our routes were done by like 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. I worked at Victoria's Secrets in the evening in the mall, stocking shelves at Victoria's Secret. Yep.
Hey,
rubbing lotion on ladies' hands, and
there you go.
I think I made like $9 an hour or something doing that. And then my time, I got my stipend from being an equipment manager. I continued being an equipment manager for the softball program throughout those internships in my undergrad. So that put me at peace. I didn't really have to worry about paying my bills and doing all that, which my parents did not help me with. I had to figure that out on my own, my gas money and all that kind of stuff. And but doing those 3 jobs put me at peace. So when I was there, I could totally just focus on learning. I wasn't preoccupied with, man, when are they going to give me a paycheck for this? Or when are they going to show me what I'm worth? I was just totally absorbed. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think also it prepared me because they kept telling me like, look, man, your first couple jobs, they're going to be rough. You're going to be super understaffed. You're going to be working a ton of hours. Your pay is going to be awful. But that's just sort of a stepping stone so that you can showcase what you can do, and people will recognize you once you do that. And that's basically what I used my 2.5 years at Belhaven College in Jackson, Mississippi for. I ended up getting recognized during, I went through an application process with the United States Olympic Committee, and someone grabbed a hold of my resume and recognized it for what it was. They looked at my internships, they looked at my undergrad and graduate coursework, and then they looked at the amount of sports I was handling at Belhaven, the attention to detail that I was doing it at. And I had listed almost every coach there as a reference. And I think that was a powerful statement that I wasn't just there paying attention to a couple of sports, that all 14 of them there felt like they were being given bespoke service at that time.
Right.
It was a good scenario that I kind of took advantage of because prior to me, they didn't really have a strength coach. They had a facility that someone had donated, and it was kind of new, a couple years old, but it just didn't have a whole lot of TLC. First thing I got there, I painted all the walls. I didn't have an office, so I built an office. I took cinder blocks and I built up an office. I used to work at a glass shop part-time when I was in school, and I begged that my former owner of that glass shop, I'm like, can you cut me a deal on a window unit? I need to put windows in my office. I don't have any money. I don't have a budget. And he's like, yeah, he's like, I tell you what, I'm working on an old house. You come help me for a weekend, I'll give you a window unit. I'm like, oh, no problems. I drove down, worked on a weekend, paid my dividend to him. Next thing I know, a custom window showed up that I could install on my office.
That's amazing, man.
But all that stuff showed up on my resume. And so that's what they were looking for at the time, the Olympic Committee. They had a bunch of tenured coaches that were already there. They were looking for a young up-and-comer that was wanting to hustle, that didn't mind bouncing around a little bit. And they threw me in acrobat and combat sports. And that's where I started gaining a lot of my experience in boxing, taekwondo, wrestling, judo, and what those athletes have to do to prepare for their sport at the world level. So yeah, being there was another, again, different layer of education, but a very immersive educational experience. I mean, I was working with wrestling coaches that were former 2- and 3-time world champions in Greco-Roman and freestyle. They had coached multiple world champions. Back then the Lopez family was in Taekwondo, and they were the best to ever do it. We had some phenomenal judo athletes. There was a young Ronda Rousey coming up at the time. She was a teenager when that was going on. Right. So just surrounded by some not only very technically savvy and highly educated coaches and practitioners, but some very competitive minds. And so being around that at that level, and you've been around them, what those competitive, they operate different. They look different. They talk different.
But I know that while you were here, you met someone. While you this transition into the Olympics.
Yep.
Working
that's
for
true.
them,
That's
you met a special woman there.
That's when I met my wife. That's exactly it. And
so
she was one of those.
Were you working? Or were you
Luckily, my scapegoat excuse and answer is I didn't actually work with her. We had our national weightlifting team was stationed there, and they trained there. And their training hall was close by. And I did have a colleague that worked with the weightlifters from time to time, did some cross training with them, but they had weightlifting coaches, so they didn't really need strength coaches. Right. And he called me one day. And he's like, "Hey, I have to go up. We had a training center in upstate New York, and he's like, I got to go to New York to work with some bobsledders. I got this overweight weightlifter who's getting ready for a meet, but she's overweight. She's going to miss weight, so she's got to do this supplemental cardio plan. Can you keep an eye on her while I'm gone?" I said, "Yeah, no problem. That's easy." And at the time, I was working with USA Boxing. We had a national camp in town, and we were hosting the Australian national team. So we were having night fights with the Australians like every night that week. So I go in the morning, get this girl on a bike. Her name is Amanda. That's my wife now. We fast forward. Get her on a bike. She's doing her thing. And she's like, "Well, what do you do? Who do you work with?" And I said, "Well, right now I'm pretty immersed in boxing. I'm working with our boxing team." Yeah. And this was our 2008 Olympic prep team. So those guys were already named to that team. Some phenomenal kids on that team. One of them being Deontay Wilder, who's one of our top heavyweight contenders currently. And anyhow, She was like, I've never seen, is it like boxing? I said, well, it's amateur boxing. So they wear headgear. It's a little bit different scoring system. And she's like, I've never seen that before. I'm like, well, there's exhibition matches going on every night. If you want to come see, all the resident athletes have free access to go in and watch them. And she was like, would you take me and a couple of the lifters and just show them? I'm like, yeah, I'll have you guys sit ringside and we'll just explain to you what's going on. And so we did. We took them to a fight, and that's where we started chatting. And next thing you know, I think for a solid 2 months after that, we met at a coffee shop, usually around like 5:30, 6 in the morning, prior to me going into work. And we just sat and had coffee and talked. That was the first 2 months of our relationship. I don't think we didn't actually go on a date until about 2 or 3 months down the road. I'll tell you that story another time. But fast forward, we've stuck together ever since. And she moved with me when I left the Olympic Committee, went to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, Michigan, to help build their Olympic sports strength and conditioning program. They had one. It was just pretty sparse at the time. For a big Power 5 school that does as well as Michigan does, they were pretty thin in a lot of their performance areas and really looking to beef them up. And so at the time, a colleague of mine, Mike Faber, took a director position there and asked me if I would come along and kind of be his right-hand man. And I did. And that was another, again, just a step that not only afforded me a ton of experience and gave me some newer responsibilities, some higher responsibilities, but I got to embark on some things I hadn't done yet, which was like hiring. I was in the hiring process now. I was hiring coaches and recruiting coaches. We were building facilities. I was a part of building 3 different facilities there or building one brand new one, renovating 2 others while we were there at the University of Michigan. And Mike really let me kind of fly under his wing and play a major role in those developments, which taught me a ton. 8.5 years later, when I got recruited for the UFC Performance Institute, they were looking for some MMA outside perspective. So they wanted someone that had familiarity with combat sports and weight cutting sports, but not necessarily someone who was currently involved in MMA. They wanted a fresh perspective from the fringe, from a peripheral viewpoint. And so for me, I kind of fit that bill. And what really attracted to me to that was being, again, another layer of educational experience, was being on the ground floor of a sport that was just really taking off from a performance standpoint. MMA had been around for a long time, Vale Tudo before that. And so it was more of, how do you approach training? How do you approach recovery? How do you approach dietary needs? There were a lot of small projects going on around the world, small gyms, small specialists that were interacting with MMA, but there really wasn't like a hub educational center or a hub area where a ton of information was getting projected outward. Most of these gyms, what they do, they hold near and dear to their hearts. There's not like a sharing mechanism for it. Right. And so the UFC Performance Institute was promoting that. And that was something that I really wanted to be a part of, not only helping to build a world-class facility and world-class service provision, but then how we outwardly face that so that we can help educate coaches, help educate fighters, help educate gyms on how to better take care of their greatest asset, which is their athletes. Right. So for me, that was a highly attractive thing as well. From, again, just it was a task that I'd never done before.
Can you tell me a little bit of, just a couple of names that you were able to work with while you were at the UFCPI? Obviously, you worked with the majority of the roster, sure, but some of them that, you really made a good connection with as well while you were there,
I'll start with 2 that just made an impact because it just told me right from Jump Street. It just set the tone. And the first one was Brad Tavares. Brad, the building wasn't even done yet. We still had drywall going up. And Forrest said, "Hey man, there's a few fighters down the street at Extreme Couture. I'm going to just give them a tour of the place and just kind of show it to them. You guys going to be around?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'll be around." I met Brad back then. It was in the PT clinic, but there were no walls. There was no glass. There wasn't anything in it. So I'm trying to explain to him what it's going to look like when we get it done. And we're only a few short weeks away from having it finished. And he goes, "Hey, I don't care about none of that. I don't care what it looks like, whatever. You tell me when we can start. When can we start?" And I was like, "All right, bro." This was in May. So I think I'll throw out an arbitrary date, like June 1st, you're with me, 9 a.m. Let's go. He's like, "All right." And we started. But just this is a dude, he had already been in the league for almost 10 years. he had tried to scrape and look in every dark corner, finding what the optimal training might look like for himself and trying to take care of his body. And that set the tone for me, just like how serious and intentional some of them could be. The next one was Dana White. As we were getting closer to finishing the building, we might have been done at that point, just getting ready for the grand opening. He calls and says, I'm coming down. I'm bringing a guy in from Africa. We're going to give him a tour, and I want him to meet all you guys. I'm like, okay, yeah, we're down here. And so we had expected to meet him down in the weight room. Well, he ended up bringing him through early, and they cut right through our offices upstairs. And it was Francis Ngannou. And back then, he could barely, he knew like 10 words of English. He's very, very good English speaking now, but back then he was not. And he was wearing a T-shirt of the original Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger, on his shirt. And so Dana's explaining to him, this is a strength and conditioning coach. He's going to help get you in shape and make sure you're healthy. And he just pointed at me and goes, I want you to make me a machine, turn me into a machine, just pointing at his shirt. And I was like, that ain't going to be that hard. This guy already naturally just looks like a mountain. Everybody's seen him now. They're aware. Crazy. Back then, no one really didn't know a lot about him. And I was trying to explain to him just how freaky of an athlete this guy is, how freaky of a human being he is. But for him, who already looked like that, to look at me and say, I want you to turn me into a machine. I'm like, bro, you look like you already eat machines for breakfast. But those two kind of set the tone. But yeah, over the years, getting to interact with the champions are great, right? I mean, we helped Conor McGregor. We helped them facilitate his camp when he was getting ready for Mayweather. We helped, Brandon Moreno when he was getting started. And then they ended up, trying to basically weed out the 125 division, and then later on to bring it back and see his resurgence to where he is today. He's an incredible kid, and he's got a ton of teammates coming along with him too, that, again, going back to that mentality and intent of some of those champions and how they operate. He's one of those different ones. To even some that were kind of on the back end of their career, been in it for a while. Alexei Olenek, big Russian. He's 44 years old, still professionally fighting. Hundreds of fights on his belt, not to mention his, tons of amateur fights, but then literally hundreds of professional fights in tiny, small rings all around Russia prior to ever getting into the big headlines here. Claudia Gadella, someone who had been, she'd been up and down, but seen the top of the mountain, really fought to try to stay there for a while. And then to see her transition out of fighting into someone who now is employed at the Performance Institute and working there. And those stories go on and on and on, the struggles of climbing the ladder, trying to stay at the top when you're there. But what makes it fascinating is they're cut from so many different types of cloth, come from so many different cultural backgrounds, different areas around the world. Khamzat Chimaev, who just fought last night, when he first came through, I didn't really get a heads up. It was, hey, this guy's going to be here for half a day. We want to get him exposed to you guys. Can you just work with him for 45 minutes or so prior to, a boxing session that he's going to have? I said, sure. Took him through a dynamic warm-up. We did a little bit of short course agility work, and I really just wanted to see him move. One of the most athletic dudes I've ever been around. I mean,
I'm going to ask you this, working with that guy. I mean, obviously we saw him last night. He was doing insane, like didn't even last 2 minutes, I don't think.
Yeah.
When you first started working with him, what'd you think? Like, hey, this guy's got it. What was your thought on him when he came in?
My first impression, which always catches me off guard, is because I always think like, man, you might have 30 seconds to make an impression. You need to sell this. You need to make sure that they understand just how capable you are of helping them. And this dude right off the jump was, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. I mean, there was no debate. There was no anything. His hands were open. It was like, show me. Right. And so it did help. At the time he had Ilir Latifi with him, who I've worked with Ilir for a number of years and have a great relationship with him. And Ilir's like, hey, bro, I'm serious. Just shut up and listen to this guy. He'll help you out. So that definitely helped having his endorsement. But the thing that, to me, when you see a guy that's like 6'2", 6'3", and he's kind of lanky like that, you always wonder what his range is, like how rangy is he? Can he move well? And some of the athletic positions that this guy can get into forcefully, meaning producing a lot of energy and a lot of force out of some very awkward positions, You just right away, I'm like, wow. I mean, he back then he still has the ability to grow into his frame a little bit. He can become more robust. He can definitely get stronger. He's dabbled back and forth between 170 and 185, but if the dude wanted to, develop a little bit over the next few years and dabble between 185 and light heavyweight, he could totally do it. But he also kind of has that martial drive like a Brandon Moreno, where that dude is constantly in the gym, and he's loyal to a point with coaches and things, but he's not scared to get out and train with other people, train with other coaches, pick up skills from other coaches, which to me that says a lot. It doesn't mean you're disloyal or you're anything to your coach, because he's still very, very much in touch with his coaches. But he wants to get out and get a hold of information and then bring it back and then say, Coach, what do you think? How can we employ this? How can we make this a part of my game?
I think that's important because, again, I work with a lot of fighters as well, and I always tell them, like, man, go out there, see something different, because when you get stuck in one spot, it's repetitive, right? You know how they move, you know how your partner moves, you know how, oh, he's gonna throw this jab, he's gonna do that. And I feel like the more you go out of your comfort zone, you go see other gyms, you'll be like, oh, okay, this might work for me. And I think that a lot of these fighters need to take advantage of that and go out and experience that. And I think Brandon's done a great job of going out there, even from the beginning of his career. He's gone out, Arizona, the Tough House, now, he's been in Entrum, which is an amazing gym. Now he's in Vegas. Now he's going to, James Krause, doing his thing there as well. Like, that's why he keeps growing and he keeps evolving. What do you think about those, like, those transitions? I know they could be a little hard, but what are your thought process?
I think there's got to be some tact to it, to where they're not burning bridges, right? And that some fighters just don't have. They just don't know how to communicate like that. No one's ever taught them those soft skills. The ones that can have an eye-to-eye conversation with their coaches to say, hey, coach, this guy over here, he's really good at this particular area. I'm going to go work with him a little bit and see if I can't adopt that. I've seen it happen in your gym over and over again. One of the things we always talk about is a lot of fighters that try to employ jiu-jitsu, it's mostly either standing up or it's on top. And when they come to your gym, I think one of the biggest things you expose them to is getting comfortable fighting off their backs. And to me, I'm like, man, that's such a deficit in the game. There's a few of the great ones that are still in it right now that they're really dangerous off their backs. But that's not like a norm. There's not a ton of people fighting off their backs like that. So I feel like when they do come, they cross-train at your gym, they get exposed to that, and it adds a level, it adds a new layer to their game. So I've seen that happen over and over again. Same way I've seen fighters go out, to different boxing gyms to pick up on not only offensive boxing, but defensive boxing. Because we know how important the defensive boxing game is in MMA with those tiny little gloves. Not getting hit is just as important, if not more important, than how to hit someone. So when you see people going out working with Trevor Whitman over and over again, because they know that dude is going to elevate my intellect when it comes to offensive and defensive boxing. So seeing that cross-pollination and athletes who are to go to someone that they know has a pedigree in that particular skill, I think that's brilliant. It's all a matter of how tactful they are in talking with their coaches, so that there's not that layer of, or that feeling of betrayal or that feeling of abandonment. It's more of, hey, I'm on an educational quest here. And I think the language around that is something that is evolving little by little. But, the word education in MMA wasn't, that hasn't always been a part of the language, just as much as, cross-pollination, synergy, things like that, to where people are working more together. You have an MMA community, not just separate MMA gyms. I think that stuff is getting a little bit more normal, but a lot of it is because the behavior is getting better. Athletes are knowing how to talk to them. They're having real relationships with their coaches, not just, hey, I pay you, you take me to a fight and we're done. I give you a percentage and then we're done and that's it. Yeah. They're building much more of a professional relationship with each other.
And I feel like lately I've been seeing a lot of that. And even before, like some athletes will just like, okay, I lost the fight, I need to move. And you got to give the coach the opportunity to mold you, build that relationship. Just showing up and you lose a fight and then you go to another place. The more you keep moving like that, right? Whether it's you're up or down, the harder it's going to be to make that connection. And I've run into a lot of those athletes, like They lose, and all of a sudden, oh, it's the coach's fault. No, 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 no. You got to look at yourself. Did you really give it 120% while you were training? Did you do everything properly? Did you eat right? Did you train the way you should be? I mean, I'm in here, and people that know me know that I'm built different. Like, my training is 2.5 hours, and I'm gonna break you mentally and physically. And if you give up, that already shows me, like, you might want to find another career,
Mhm.
because you should treat this like an 8-hour job. And a lot of these guys come in, they do 1 hour, and they're like, oh, I'm tired. No, 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 no. You still got to go do your strength and conditioning. You still got to go do your rehab. You got to still go do your boxing. There's a lot of things that go into this. And I feel like a lot of these athletes get into the big organizations, and then they just plateau. Why?
Mhm.
Because they got comfortable. They feel like, oh, well, I'm in, I'm doing my thing. And then they don't realize the goal is not to just get there. The goal is to stay there as long as possible. And I
Mhm.
think that's what's missing on a lot of these athletes. They got to allow the coaches to mold them, make that connection to see the right results. What do you think
Yeah.
about that?
Well, I think the title "Evolve Your Game." I mean, that suits it perfectly. That's exactly it. If your evolution stops, or your idea of wanting to pursue evolution, if that stops, then that's exactly what you're talking about when you hit that plateau. I think the other thing is confidence is such a big thing in the sport. If you don't have confidence, it's just tough to go lock yourself in a cage and battle another human being.
Right.
And but it comes to the point where they're so falsified in the confidence sometimes that they're not realistic. You got just as equal chance of going in there and losing as you do winning. It's 50-50. And it does it. And sometimes this is where it's such an unforgiving sport, because you could do everything right preparatory wise. You can have a phenomenal game plan, an unbelievable support system, healthy, making weight easy, feel energized. You can do everything perfect and still lose. It's how you evaluate that, which I think is why you can't just run at that point. You've got to sit down with your coaching staff, really give a thorough evaluation, and find out where the mistakes were made, because obviously there was a lot of proper preparation that had gone on. So just as a team, analyze it, figure out where the leaks are, plug those leaks, and then move forward. That's an acquired skill. You see a lot of veteran fighters that get better at it over time. Some of the ones that get caught up in the storms of gym jumping, repetitively over time. You're right; it's difficult because all of your skills, they're getting muddled up. You've even almost forgotten what to believe in. Because you had this thing that used to work really well, and then you weren't winning with it. Instead of evolving, you've almost forgotten what that is. You've tried to adopt some new things, but they're not dogma to you yet. And so they're just so muddled up that they're not instinct. And if it's not instinct, you're not going to use it in the cage.
Right.
It's got
Do
to
you
get to the
feel
point where it's second nature.
do you feel that goes on with a lot of not just MMA athletes, but football athletes, everything else? They get complacent, and even maybe even in the weight room, like when they're doing their
Yeah.
strength and conditioning, some of those guys break, and
Yep.
not just in the training room, but also in the strength and conditioning program. You see a lot of that at the highest level.
Yeah, and part of it is you've got to have, especially for your strength and conditioning to transfer into the cage, you have to have martial intent with what you do. Meaning, if you watch a guy, if I watch your best kids in that gym right now at Cobrinha, if they're drilling, I mean, they're drilling, their eyes are wide open and dilated. They have the most intent, even if they're drilling at a slower speed. Everything is in the right place. Hands are in the right place. Feet are in the right place. Shoulder position, shoulder pressure, whatever the task is. There's a martial intent. But for some reason, when I put my hand on a kettlebell, I just casually pick up the kettlebell, do whatever, you know. So learning, and that has to be taught. That has to be coached on how to address a barbell, how to address a treadmill for a sprint interval, how to address the jump rope. But until you can address it that way with that type of martial intent, it doesn't matter how good of a drill or exercise it is. It's not going to transfer to your fitness levels when you're actually fighting. So you got to be. I think that's a big part of the responsibility of a good strength and conditioning coach is you've got to have valid methods that you're using, but then you've got to get them to execute those valid methods with a certain level of martial intent will actually transfer and deliver what it's supposed to while they're in the cage. Otherwise,
Right.
you just randomly exercising. And I'm the biggest. If what you're doing doesn't transfer into the cage, you should be resting. You'd be better off going and taking a nap, eating a meal, rest instead of just wasting energy doing some haphazard shit in the weight room.
Now, Bo, I'm going to ask you: do you feel like a lot of them overtrain, or they just don't structure their training properly in between? I know we've talked about sometimes the intensity needs to be high one day, low the other day. Letting your body, like you said, rest is so important. You
Mm-hmm.
know, tell us a
I
little
think
bit
that
about
I think structure and strategy is usually the culprit. There are very few of them that are actually overtraining. There are a lot of them that are under eating, which also leads to under recovering. But overtraining, because when you look at the body of the work, are they doing a lot of reps and are they doing a lot of sessions? Yes. But when the work has no economy to it and no strategy, that's when you start to cover up those windows of recovery. So when I would sit down with a fighter and say, hey, what's your training week look like? We would lay out everything. And then I started looking for opportunities. Where could we potentially put strength and conditioning work to make a positive contribution to what you're doing? Well, if there are no windows, if I plug those in, if there were no windows to rest and recover from that, then to me, it's not worth it. So we got to have a conversation of, is this week strategized for you, or is this just the only time you can get in the gym because that's when that gym is open for business? Or what is it that's causing this, and what can we manipulate and move around so that we can open up some bigger windows of
that.
recoverability? If we can do that, then I can say, hey man, I've got some tactics that we can employ, and I feel confident that you'll be able to recover from it so that it will give you some benefit when it comes time to train jiu-jitsu or boxing or MMA sparring.
Right.
So strategy and structure is typically the weak side. Unfortunately, the business side of MMA, all these gyms, they're structured and they're set up to make money. They want people to enroll in their classes so they can teach. And then, well, you have a fighter that comes along. That class is not going and stepping in that cage and competing with that fighter. It's an
Right.
individual endeavor that they're on. So some gyms have gotten really good at being able to carve out training and individualize it for that particular person. Some are not as good at it. So that fighter's just going to the group classes, the general classes over and over again, which I think can be very beneficial early on in their career. When you're getting to the point where there's a lot at stake and everything kind of needs to center around you, I don't know that that's the most ideal scenario. And some gyms just aren't engineered to be able to deliver their classes and their services a la carte like that to someone like a Brandon Moreno or like a Francis Ngannou. And so that's where, when fighters are kind of vetting out their support system and who they got to be confident in knowing that they're going to pivot and re-engineer some of their training structure when it comes time to fight on bigger stages for bigger stakes. And especially when you're trying to fight for world championships,
Right.
all that stuff kind of matters. If you're wasting your time doing a beginner wrestling class and you're a 4-year All-American collegiate wrestler and wrestling is your pedigree, I don't know that energy is well spent when you could be boxing and doing a one-on-one boxing class with a boxing professional or a one-on-one jiu-jitsu class, So
And do you
those are
feel
hard waters. Those are hard, tough waters for fighters to navigate sometimes because it's a matter of when. Because, like I said, an amateur fighter, I don't know that they need a la carte service like that, nor can they probably afford it at that point. But they need a lot more mileage in the general structure of training. Whereas when you get someone that starts to become specialized, then yeah, they should have some specialized training engineered for them.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Like, I think when you get to a certain level, you have to be very selfish,
Mm-hmm.
and just, I mean, it sounds bad, but you got to focus on yourself and make sure that you
100%.
surround yourself with the specialists that you need for you. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when you have 60 fighters, even myself, at one point when I was sponsoring athletes from Manaus, Brazil, I was bringing in 15 guys in here, sponsoring them, paying their food, paying their housing. All they had to do was train. They all became world champions, so on and so forth. Great. But I felt like I couldn't give them still 120% of my time.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like the more athletes I had, the harder it was getting for me to give them that attention. And I felt like
Mm.
the the level they were plateauing and they weren't really evolving. They stayed there. Once I've got to the point where I only had a handful of guys, like right now, what I'm doing now, I felt like I was really giving them the attention they deserve.
Yeah.
Um, one of my students, Frank, like Frank was one of those guys that grew up with those guys. That he was getting killed every day in the gym. As it started progressing, he was getting better. And now that he doesn't have those guys, I'm able to give him and a couple other students like Helena Cravar and
Mm-hmm.
Gloria, the ones that compete, the opportunity to like, hey, here's that one-on-one attention. Here's that 30 minutes just for you.
Mm.
Feel like that's kind of, but sometimes I feel like some people like the bigger groups, which is totally fine.
Yep.
But different strokes for different folks. To me, I like it that way because again, I feel like okay, we're going into this fight. I know myself. I gave him the attention he needed. We gave
Mm-hmm.
it 120%, and we're going forward. What do you think?
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And the there's a lot of wisdom in that with saying, with a smaller group, if I whittle it down to a smaller group of people, I can deliver better service. There's not a lot of coaches that will say that because a bigger group will be more lucrative so I can keep my business running. So to be able to step back and do that, there's a lot of wisdom in that, difficult to execute. As someone who's taken on the responsibility of instruction and taken on the
Right.
responsibility of owning a gym, that's something that I think you need to have a game plan for, something you've executed pretty well. But they kind of have to develop a game plan on how to do that so that they don't cut someone short in terms of how they're supporting and nurturing and taking care of them. I know personally, outside of just the tactics and the training, the time that you invest with the conversations and talking to those athletes and fighters on, how do you have someone helping with your marketing? Do you have someone that's helping you with sponsorship? And if not, then you putting them in front of people that can do that. And that part is, that's a coach that's invested. And there's a lot of good ones like that. I know that I've interacted with within the UFC, but there are some that still struggle with that. They don't quite have the tools and the skills to be
Yeah.
able to do that.
I feel like a lot of them, like you said, it for me it's different. I don't live off of my gym,
Mm-hmm.
right? A lot of these guys, that's their bread and butter. They don't
Yeah.
have that backup plan. They never had that plan A and plan B. And that's all they do, which is totally fine. Again, that's luckily I
Mm-hmm.
was able to do that. And I'm able to do that now. But for some of them, they don't have that opportunity. And I think
Yeah.
that's where, again, it does change. So again, it just, like I said, different strokes for different folks.
It's how you
And
play your cards.
exactly. So again, a lot of these gyms they do great, and a lot of fighters do great in big groups. But I personally prefer it to be smaller. And I noticed that you guys, when you guys were doing your workouts at the Performance Institute, the UFC, you only allowed two guys. You know what I mean? When you guys were doing your workouts, did
Yeah.
you feel like having just two? Maybe some of those guys brought five guys, and they're like, "Wait a second, this is not going to
Yeah.
work." What
Well,
is the benefits of just being two or a bigger group for you?
one of the things we were engineered for at the Institute was everything from start to finish was totally structured and sculpted for that particular fighter based off of a ton of diagnostics, medical testing, medical screening, dietary screening. So everything was engineered for them. And so it does help sometimes when you're training, especially when you're going to dark places in training, to have training partners with you. So we never wanted to discourage them having training partners, but we were very upfront and clear, like, hey, this workout, it's not engineered for that person. They need to know that so they understand they're participating in something that's built for you. And at your level, you may be better than them, you may be worse off than them. We had some that brought in training partners that could run circles around them. And we just want to make sure they understood that it doesn't matter how good or bad their partner performs at it, that it's engineered for them. We're on the developmental road for them with what we were doing. We did have to have some cutoff limits because, everybody, it's like a tourist attraction. Everybody wants to come and work out in a state of the art, like world class facility. Um,
Disney, yeah.
but it could easily water down the intention and the seriousness and the devoted time to what was supposed to be happening during that hour and a half that we had with that particular fighter. And when someone's getting ready again for a bout that means a lot, which could be a championship bout. We don't want any time wasted or any distraction. So that was the nice thing about having, we had a bunch of assistants and we had some interns and things. So if we did, if there was a major discrepancy between, if they bring in a partner that's nowhere near their level, I'd be like, hey, look, I'm going to have my intern. They're going to occupy you with this, while you're doing that. But with Brandon Moreno, we need to be doing this. That dude's getting ready for this fight coming up. So, not to discourage anybody. We don't want anyone to feel unwelcome. That's part of their entourage. Sometimes it's part of their family. It's their coach, So we didn't ever want anyone to feel disrespected. But ultimately, what we did was built specifically for that fighter. Very a la carte, very one-on-one, and at a world-class level that doesn't exist in a lot of places. So we were trying to provide something that was unique in that way.
Nice. And I see now you moved to Texas. Right, you're at Texas A&M,
yep.
Right?
I am.
What made you decide to take this opportunity there? I mean, you've done a lot for the UFCPI and build some of those facilities there for the, alongside Duncan and everyone else there at the PI. What made you take that decision and move to Texas A&M?
Yeah, one of the most difficult decisions in my life. I've always had this itch to scratch when it comes to administration in collegiate athletics. This one just happened to be that. Plus, it's really close to my family, which we've never had that in my entire 20-year career, 20-plus year career now. We've never been within driving distance of family. And
you get to play in the grass.
And I get to lay in the grass. The hunting and fishing scene is amazing in this neck of the woods, not to mention the network for it here, the people that you meet in the outdoors community. I mean, that's my hobby, and it's amazing. It's a fun place to be. But ultimately, from a leadership standpoint, there weren't a lot more steps to climb in the ladder at the UFCPI where I was at. Between Duncan and our executive team, administratively from a decision making and management standpoint, my growth potential was a little bit limited in terms of what opportunities would look like. And at Texas A&M, they're essentially offering me an administrative role with a lot of oversight, not only on personnel, but facilities. And then programmatically, they were looking at wanting to go through quite a bit of evolution in terms of how they deliver services with a collegiate institute or a collegiate university, which I personally have a lot of passion for. I feel like a lot of collegiate strength and conditioning programs are very much a puppy mill where you're just running them in and out and kids are getting run ragged, and sports aren't necessarily training appropriate for what they're competing in. It can get very cookie cutter. And that's always kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. And I felt like that, a good professional would have to have a good platform to be able to change the tides on that, because not every institution will give you the ability to do that. And I feel like A&M that's exactly what they were presenting to me, was autonomy to be able to shift some of those tides, but also do it in a way that could be visible and impactful to the surrounding collegiate community. And so we're only about 9 months into it now, but that's exactly what they've allowed me to embark on. So it's been fulfilling in that way. No question at all how much I miss the UFC, the executive team there, my UFC PI teammates. I see what they go through every week. When I see those cards going, all the debacle that went on with this fight card, UFC 279, I know exactly what they're going. I know who was losing sleep. I know who was traveling. I know who was, up late helping guys cut weight, who was up early helping bring guys food. So much appreciation for all those that keep carrying that torch. And I anticipate that place is only going to get better and better.
Man, those guys put a lot of work in. I mean, I've surrounded myself with those guys too, and man, they lose a lot of sleep. It's crazy, but they always ask about you, right? They're always saying, "Talk to Bo," and I'm like, "Yeah, I did a little bit here and there. He's playing in the grass. He's doing his thing. He's enjoying." I thought the move would, kind of give you a little bit of, something that you've been missing out, especially over here in this dry ass place.
Yep. Believe it or not, too, man, we miss Vegas. We really grow. If you get out you kind of learn to grow into your surroundings. And so being that close to Utah and like Bryce Canyon and the different national parks and 4-hour drive to California. And, it definitely, it's people think it's just the strip. You go there and you go to the casinos and that's it. But for people that don't know, get out and explore around. You get into the Henderson and Summerlin areas. Like there's some cool spots around there. You'd be in the Red Rock Mountains in, a few minutes. And it's it's a special place. So, and it happens to be the fight capital of the world. So if you like watching scraps, it's a great place to be.
Yeah. And if you had anything that you wanted to tell the next generation of people that are in your industry and also MMA fighters, the next generation, what would it be?
Again, I'll go back to your slogan there, evolve your game. To me, the greatest attribute in doing what I do is adaptability. It is way too easy to be labeled as old school or one trick pony or single minded in this industry if you're not visibly adaptable, if you can respond to things as they come. I've kind of been a little bit of a chameleon in that sense. People try to nail me down and like, oh, you're a football guy because I worked with football in my younger years. Oh, you're an Olympic guy because you worked with the Olympics. So now you're a fight guy. You're fighting. I've always taken pride. I've worked with almost every sport that's out there. Aesthetic sports, diving, synchronized swimming, gymnastics, combat sports, obviously, team and technical sports, pistol rifle shooters, archery. To me, what that offered was an ability to adapt. It was, what skills do I have that I can apply right now? And then what skills are they going to teach me while I'm interacting with this group? And what that's done is it's given me opportunities to take jobs that people are like, how did you get that job? I don't understand it. Like, how are you a candidate? And most of my job opportunities, minus maybe one or two, I didn't go and apply to an online, position or a spot that was open. It was a recruiter who would seek me out and had mentioned an opportunity to me. And I think that speaks volumes to adaptability. So when I meet with a new coach or an up and comer, we got students right now at Texas A&M that are graduate students wanting to be strength coaches. First thing I tell them is I'm like, hey, what are you good at? And they start listing all these things. I'm like, it doesn't matter. If you want to be a leader in this industry, if you want to leave your mark and make your name in this industry, you have to be adaptable. And I don't mean adaptable like give me 6 months and I'll learn it. You need to be adaptable minute by minute, 1 millimeter at a time. Adaptable. Can you pivot? Are you open-minded enough to where you don't hold on to your morals so tight that you can't listen to an idea and absorb it in 30 seconds? If you can do that, you're definitely going to make your name for yourself in this industry. Someone will recognize you. They appreciate it. And they're going to see the effort and how you're trying to hone your skills specific to what they need.
Nice. Man, thank you so much, Bo, for all the information you gave us today. It was great having you on the podcast. I really appreciate everything that you've done for us as well while you were here and what you're doing even out there. You want to give out any shout outs to any sponsors, anything out there?
No sponsors. I'm always a big fan of my friends and family, and you guys at Cobrinha Las Vegas, you fit right in that category. So what you guys have shown us in terms of a welcome mat and open arms and embracing me and my two boys and my wife has never been forgotten. And all I would say is if you are wanting to be around world-class minds that are constantly learning, that are constantly navigating a world where there's opportunity and creating opportunities, come hang around this guy. Go and hang around Cobrinha Las Vegas. You spend 30 minutes with this guy talking to him. You'll be ambitious about something. You won't even know what it is, but you'll be out there trying to do something you never thought you'd be doing. So right. I can attest to it over and over again.
We got you, man.
It's always, yeah.
Right, we started your business.
It's true.
People didn't know about that.
Yeah, there's this weird thing in strength and conditioning. They don't really teach you how to be an entrepreneur. Yes. You're not it's not a very business-minded industry. Yeah. So, I definitely benefited a ton from being able to be around you and seeing how you guys operate. and knowing that there's more worth to me than just what comes out of my mouth. And you have to be taught that. Some people might have it naturally. I definitely don't. So that's had to been a learned skill for me. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for the continued conversation around that and helping me grow. But I'll tell you, anytime I get a chance to have a conversation with you, I'm always game. Don't ever hesitate to ask. It's been an absolute blast to get to bullshit a little bit here for 55 minutes on a Sunday afternoon. So I'll do that any day.
Thank you, brother, so much. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Another great episode right here with my good friend Bo. Again, keep evolving in everything that you do.